Session of the Brookline Fall Special Town Meeting. The moderator, Kate Popperman, is indisposed this evening, and I'm Sandy Gadsby, the assistant moderator who spent 27 years behind this podium as your town moderator. So I guess I ought to know what I'm doing. The town clerk to order. I'm reminded of Kenny Jackson's song, "You picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille." But fortunately, we have nothing controversial on the agenda this evening. So we'll start right in with Article 39, the main motion for which is on page 39-9 over to page 39-11. It's moved by Ms. Goldsmith, seconded by Wendy Friedman, that the town adopt a resolution urging the Park and Recreation Commission to broaden the scope of the golf course landscape master plan to consider what additional uses other than playing golf are feasible within that acreage, and secondly, to ask that a portion of either the master plan funds or the golf course enterprise fund be used to pay for an updated plan. We have many speakers, and I will ask that you adhere strictly to the time limits. I call first on Wendy Friedman for the petitioner's presentation. You have 8 minutes, you and your two colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. And I'd like to request that I use the first 4 minutes, and then I'm going to pass it over to Len Woolley.
That's fine with me, however you want to whack it up.
Okay. Hello, town meeting. I'm Wendy Friedman, town meeting member for Precinct 5. Warrant article is, oh, sorry, actually, can we have the slides? Okay, so I'll go ahead and start at the 4 minutes now. Hello, I'm Wendy Friedman, town meeting member for Precinct 5. Warrant Article 39 is a resolution that asks for the ongoing golf course master planning process to be widened to consider ways this parcel of land, which makes up almost 25% of all the green space in Brookline, might serve more people. We are compelled to develop this article specifically because this space is so large and because it became clear at planning meetings that the commitment to 18 holes was greatly constraining options. Next slide, please. Before we talk about the golf course, let's just make sure we're all on the same page, and that's 39-9. Based on community concerns that our warrant article posed an environmental risk by opening the golf course to various forms of recreational development, the final version of Article 39 first goes to lengths to ensure that consideration of additional uses of this land be environmentally responsible and not result in further degradation of the natural peatland. And second, requests that the Parks and Rec survey data on community priorities be used to inform the master plan. Next slide, please. Why does this matter to us when, as I'm sure you will hear tonight from many people, Brookline already has plenty of green space for our community to use? First, again, this land is 22% of our open space. This is not Dane Park. This is not Summit Hill. This space is enormous and it's unique. It's unique in terms of its ecosystems, and it's also unique in terms of how few people get to experience it. In fiscal year 21, less than 4% of rounds played at the golf course were played by residents. This is 4% of unique rounds. Since golfers likely play more than once a year, this number represents far fewer than 4% of our community. Indeed, more than 90% of rounds are played by non-residents. Now, please do not let the comments tonight mislead you. We are absolutely not saying the wrong people are playing here and that we should be exclusive. We welcome all people to Brookline and to this golf course. This data point merely illustrates how few people in town access the largest open space asset in all of Brookline. With more inclusive uses at this property, we suspect that we would have more visitors and do a better job of addressing our community priorities. Next slide, please. Speaking of community priorities, in 2019, Parks and Rec sent a community survey to a statistically representative sample of residents to understand how community members use our recreational assets, what are most important to them, and what they want prioritized. The results show that of our current resources, trails, biking infrastructure, and nature preserves are both most important and what people think we need more of. Just as a note, the municipal golf course came in at number 21, the last on the list in terms of importance. All of these top needs could be integrated into the golf course if the master plan seriously considered ways of accommodating walkers, joggers, and bikers, and considered how to return some of this land to its more natural conditions, rather than continuing to fight with nature. While we've been told that these things are under consideration, we've also been told directly that paths are not feasible because it is just not safe to give access to walkers and bikers while golf is being played. To our knowledge, no consideration has been given to reducing playing hours to provide greater access. Next slide, please. In general, we hear the golf course is our greatest natural asset and that it's a win-win because it costs the town nothing. But the taxpayers do pay. We pay with land and we pay with access. This was recognized when the enterprise fund, the fiscal arm of the golf course, was first set up. It paid $200,000 annually to the town for use of the land. This fee declined over time and then finally disappeared altogether. Finally, we pay by allowing practices that are at odds with our environmental commitment. Practices such as spraying large quantities of pesticides on the course, draining the peat bog, and having players move around the course in gas-powered carts. Next slide, please. Again, we ask that the constraints that have been placed on this planning process be removed. The first planning meeting suggested that the footprint of the 18-hole course could potentially be reduced to accommodate other activities. This suggestion has been rejected in all of our conversations and public hearings. At the third meeting, the priority and constraints were made explicit, maintaining 18 holes at all costs. And I'm going to now pass the presentation on to Len, please.
Mr. Hooley, W-H-O-L-E-Y.
Hello, my name is Len Woolley, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 11. Next slide, please. The financial cost of the golf course landscape master plan is $50,000. Next slide, please. From the master plan, we have learned that the predicted cost for drainage modifications alone is over $1.7 million, and costs at the golf course are already increasing year after year. Next slide, please. How will we cover the additional costs of implementing the master plan? It is unlikely that we can increase the price for a round of 9 holes of golf. Within 30 miles, it is already the second most expensive out of 25 courses for non-residents. Next slide, please. With the current
committee and a registered landscape architect. I just wanted to remind everybody that in October 2022, Park and Rec Commission voted 4-0-1 against Warrant Article 39. Robert T. Lynch is a public regional municipal golf course that we should be proud of. It was designed by Wayne Stiles and John Van Cleek during the Great Depression and opened in 1933. Stiles studied under Frederick Law Olmsted, whose design obviously preserved the natural and scenic beauty of the property. Next slide. At our Park and Rec Commission in December 10th, 2019, the commission voted at one of their public meetings 4-1 to pursue a landscape master plan because we felt we needed a better understanding of the infrastructure investment strategy for the golf course. There were several projects on the table, and we wanted to make sure that we were moving forward with the golf course in the right way. Next slide, please. Directly from the proposal, I highlighted some of the points that address the creation of a comprehensive plan for an 18-hole golf course and practice areas. We also stressed in trying to look at minimizing the footprint of the property if possible. We knew that we needed to deal with the land, and we're looking at the drainage, wetlands improvements, overhaul of a very old irrigation system, agronomical practices, and accessibility. The tree management plan, the trees were in really dire conditions, so we knew we needed a management plan for that. Creek and wetlands management plan, also because of the poor drainage. The architect was also told that golf was not the only sport that was played here, and to consider other community activities. Next slide. The design review committee process followed the master plan process followed the Parks and Rec design review process. Meetings began in November of 2021 and continued all the way through to September 22. For all our meetings were publicly notified. We had 4 in person, 6 Zoom meetings, and 1 public hearing. At every single meeting, there was time allocated for public comment. Next slide. The next following slides, I'm going to try and go through quickly, but I just wanted to show you the constraints of the municipal golf course. Next slide. This is the first, I want to orient you where the orange star indicates where the golf club is. And that is Newton and turns into Hammond Street. This is a map, and it's actually mislabeled, but it's a USDS survey plan that outlines the peat on the site. And based on the soil testings that were done beforehand, there's a general average depth of 36 inches of peat with a high water table of anywhere between 0 to 1 foot. Next slide. This indicates the exposed ledge. The dark gray areas are the exposed ledge, and the light gray is ledge just below the surface. So you can see that ledge also bisects the land in a lot of places. Next. The existing streams and culverts are the blue dashed lines, and the red lines are the protected wetland setbacks. Next, please. There is also a map provided by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection with an activity use limitation due to contaminated soils on the site, the yellow area along Hammond Street. Next slide, please. This is an overlay of all those maps that I've just shown to you. So if you put it all together, you can see that this is a very constricted and a difficult site to modify. Next slide, please. The preliminary master plan indicates new open waterways, ponds, and trails shown by the red stars and the red arrows. The plan improves existing culverts that have negative slopes or are severely damaged and non-functioning waterways that do not allow water to flow and drain. There are certain tributary ditches that discharge from skating, irrigation, and ponds from the country club and polluted runoff from Newton Street. The new open waterways and ponds have existing vegetated edges that will help filter out pollutants before the water reaches the Charles River. This plan just was awarded a 2022 Environmental Excellence Award due to the enhanced natural environment, lowering fossil fuels, as well as improved drainage and the removal of culverts and restoration of open waterways and other features. Next. We have some incredibly competent people taking care and running the golf course who have already invested in a sound land care program. Mike Murphy, who is our golf course superintendent, must adhere to all Massachusetts state regulations. He has an integrated pest management plan and best management practices when administering any care to the property. I've read through that document. You should all take a look at it. It is pretty impressive. Next, please. I'd like to introduce you to Jim Carroll.
Mr. Carroll, you have a minute and 20 seconds.
Hello. Next slide, please. Yes, talking about the leadership. Antonio, where's? Can you mute your? All right, you did.
Yeah, you apparently have two audio sources, Mr. Carroll, and it's you know, it might be a better plan, Mr. Carroll, for you just to take a 3-minute session after we've heard from another speaker in favor of this article, rather than take the minute and 20 seconds that's left for you. Would you
Okay.
rather do that, sir?
Yep, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. I call on Ms. Duffield.
Hi, I'm Cher Duffield from Precinct 10. Could you please bring up the slide deck that started with Wendy Friedman and go to slide number 13? Slide 13, please. All right, so I just wanted to show you what a comprehensive planning process would look like. Next slide, please. Slide after this, yes. So in Miami, oh, sorry, go back one. In Miami, they're considering 3 choices for their municipal golf course. And they're presenting this to the people. So the first scenario is just kind of tinkering around the edges, making some small modifications. Second scenario is rewilding 9 holes. And third scenario is totally reimagining the space. Now, we are not proposing something like number 3, but I just wanted to show you that it would be a wonderful option if we could have various scenarios that have been analyzed to present to the town to look at. Can you go to the next slide, please? You're going to hear tonight that this is the greenest use of the land and that it might be an environmental disaster to change the use from the golf course. But is that really true? Consider the huge amount of pesticides and fertilizers that are used. Also consider the millions that are spent to fight the natural peat bog by draining it to permit golfing. There are 69 groomed acres and a driving range that have been largely denuded of trees. And there's also non-native grass that has to be coaxed to grow where it wouldn't naturally be. You will hear about awards that the golf course has received or is applying for, but be aware that these are not environmental organization awards, but rather ones that the golf industry gives to itself. The Audubon Award, for example, is a business award and has no link to the bird-friendly Audubon Society. Next slide. So the golf is actually fighting the peat bog, draining it. So the golf course has spent millions on drainage, and the current master plan draft commits more to keeping the land dry to improve the playing experience. But peat needs to be wet to keep the carbon captured. High water levels are necessary. The master plan prioritizes play quality, stating that the functionality is the top priority. The master plan should focus on improvements that promote consistently good playing conditions throughout the golf season. Poor drainage is the most negative feature of the existing course. Next slide, please. So what could be, this is just, you know, we haven't designated an outcome from this process, but think about it. We could have a certification for our responsibly managed peat, or we could sign up for urban forest carbon credit program. Next slide, please. Please vote yes on warrant article 39. This is a non-binding resolution that will greenlight the Parks and Recreation Commission to consider a broader scope for the Putterham Master Plan. A wider lens on the plan can offer a chance to serve more Brookliners. A broader plan will create the chance for us to be better stewards of the land. Let's take this opportunity to maximize the benefits of this beautiful land for golfers, non-golfers, and the environment alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Okay, if we could return back to the slide. Okay. Under the leadership of our golf course general manager, Justin Lawson, the meaning of the 18-hole Robert T. Lynch course has removed the moniker of an old tired municipal golf course. In merely 2 years, Justin Lawson has created momentum at the course with the improved play, community outreach, and national attention for innovative environmental improvements that are undeniable. After 89 years, the course is on an upward trajectory, and to stop the master plan at this juncture, which is 80% complete, would be a disservice to the public process and to all those involved. This trajectory should be built on, not dismantled. Slide. Next slide. Community and charitable events. In 2022, the golf course hosted 27 charitable events. This is the true definition of a municipal 18-hole golf course, which is open to everyone and anyone, including place of domicile. The golf course pays for and hosts community events such as free golf clinics for underserved groups, BHA families, Special Olympics, runs the Harvest Fest and the 5K run, movie night on the range, diversity symposium, Nordic cross country, snowshoeing, potential skating on the newly created retention pond, and other events and activities under consideration. Next slide. It's the mission of the Park and Recreation Commission and the Director of Recreation to ensure that the golf course continues to operate in a sustainable manner for the preservation of recreational activities and the use of the property for future generations. This means a balance of people, planet, and enterprise. Slide, please. What is the enterprise fund? Revenues from the golf course create an enterprise fund that in turn runs and sustains the golf course. There is no financial burden to the tax-paying residents of Brookline. The enterprise fund requires the commission and the recreation department to be fiscally responsible and establish an investment roadmap for the golf course. Specifically, the enterprise fund finances all the operations, capital improvements, and maintenance of the golf course and clubhouse, and everything else relating to the operation thereof. Slide, please. Park and Recreation voted 4-0 with 1 abstention for no action on warrant article 39. The select board, sub-advisory, full advisory, planning board, and PACs have heard the arguments of warrant article 39 and voted no action. Slide, please. The landscape master plan has comprehensive components that address stormwater management that would greatly reduce the risk of downstream flooding, increase the natural filtration of pollutants. Reducing the golf course to 9 holes jeopardizes the ability of the property to be maintained in order to preserve this neighborhood asset. This land is a singular floodplain and must be managed in its totality, not as 2 parcels of land. It is irresponsible to take away a thriving, sustainable recreation asset. Slide, please. Within 1 mile of the golf course, there are 177 acres of underused open spaces that provide walking, walking trails, natural forests, wetlands, animal sanctuaries, and bird watching. Skyline Park, Lars Anderson Park, Lost Pond Sanctuary, Putterham Woods, Dane Park, Forest Sanctuary, and Walnut Hill Cemetery. I have personally visited many of these parks and sanctuaries over the last 4 weeks and have noticed that there's little, if nobody, ever on these facilities.
Please
In our opinion, the
conclude,
votes for
Carol.
no action were not only to support RTL in its current state, but to celebrate what the golf course is becoming: a leading steward of nationally recognized environmental innovative practices, financially backed initiatives to reach underserved populations,
Please
a regional
conclude, Mr.
center for
Carroll.
hosting charitable events, and a host to all that practice the game and celebrates etiquette, discipline, camaraderie, and above all, humility. Let's continue to move forward and celebrate the variety of Brookline.
Mr. Carroll, if you don't
I-
conclude, I'm going to have to silence you. Are you? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Benson? Benson?
Hi, this is Jeffrey Benson, precinct 3. I like golf. I want to start off with that. And I'm wondering, and I actually appreciate that the people who like golf are advocating for themselves. They should. I think they're advocating for a minority of people who use that land. And I think it's incumbent on the rest of us to say, is that the best use of the land for everybody? And to not be kept in ignorance for fear of doing the research. What if it were ecologically better to have a smaller golf course? Why can't we know that? What if it was economically better? Why can't we research that? What if it opened up more athletic possibilities? How come we can't research that? What if it would allow more civic engagement and participation than potential or possible events? Why can't we research that? Why are we being asked to stay in ignorance? Dedicated solely to use that huge swath of land for huge space we have in Brookline dedicated to golf, and I like golf. My last part on this is, I want to appreciate Antonia for talking about the ecological and environmental concerns that they're trying to manage. That has nothing to do whether we have 18 holes or 9 holes or no holes. Yay, we should always do that for our land, regardless of how many holes of golf were dedicated for that. And lastly, how many years or decades more does this master plan require us to hold that land for 18 holes of golf? And why should we be wedded to 18 holes for the foreseeable or unforeseeable future with all the changes and needs in town, because that's how it's been for 100 years? I urge everyone to vote for this warrant article as an opportunity for us to do research for all of Brookline, to look at that land, and not in any way to demean the people who love golf or the people who have taken care of the golf course. This is for all of us. Thank you very much.
Mr. Weintraub, you have 3+ minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, good evening. I'm Bob Weintraub, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. Tonight, I represent 25 million American golfers and thousands of golfers who are welcomed throughout the year to our beautiful 18-hole municipal golf course. I represent all of these golfers because it is clear from their writing and statements that the petitioners do not believe that we should have a thing called golf courses. Their ever-changing proposals, athletic fields, tennis and pickleball courts, a dog park, a swimming pool, on, reflect a determination to find any options other than a golf course. These are solutions in search of a problem. Their problem is our historic, fully utilized, well-managed, fiscally sound, environmentally responsive, naturally beautiful 18-hole public golf course, appreciated and used by an increasingly diverse group of people of all ages and backgrounds from Brookline and beyond. Please see the letter that I sent to all town meeting members from the Boston Black Golf Association. The Brookline Golf Course is an asset that we attract golfers from throughout the region. It's an asset. The petitioners say they want to open up around 60 acres or so, quote, for more of the community. By doing that, they will close the space to thousands of golfers. By doing that, it would mean that the country club's members would have 27 holes of golf, and the rest of us, the public, would have 9. I don't think the math works. If there were a desperate need that had to be fulfilled, we could certainly understand considering how the golf course might factor into a solution, but none of their constantly emerging proposals are compelling when compared to the golf course, which serves thousands every year. You know, a 4-minute bike ride from one end of the revamped golf course to the other versus 30,000 rounds of 4 to 5 hours of healthy exercise. I don't think the math works. What also might not work is the money. As we know, our 18-hole public golf course run through an enterprise fund is self-sustaining and has a healthy surplus. Let me get this right. We are several years into preparing a master plan for the golf course. Some of the ideas emerging from the master plan actually include some of those offered by the petitioners. Now, warrant Article 39 proposes to take hundreds of thousands of dollars from the surplus achieved by our well-managed golf course and invest it in a new master plan that they hope will existentially degrade the well-managed golf course that gave them the funds to do that. Really? Who would make that deal? We just spent $5.8 million to renovate the 5-acre Cypress Field and playground site in front of the Brookline High School. I haven't heard any figures for the redevelopment of some 60 acres of our golf course, whose topography, as you know, is far more challenging. Their proposed solutions do not generate a dollar. Where are the millions coming from? The math does not work. A few weeks ago, Barry Weissman and I, both in our 70s, played 18 holes of golf at our public golf course. The course was packed with the usual variety of humans. In October, bright fall colors framed the rich green meander. Red-tailed hawks of art and a greater Boston treasure. Warrant Article 39 would desecrate that art. Please vote no on 39. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Hyett. Eric, I think.
Hi there. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Eric Hyatt, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10. I told the petitioners that I was in awe of their courage, especially their and that I'd love to speak in favor. I absolutely support having the broadest possible discussion about the golf course. Everyone should support that. Since signing up to speak, I've been asking everyone I meet, is a golf course nature? It sounds like a simple question. Is a golf course nature? I ask this to everyone. Most people do not like answering it. It makes them uncomfortable. I did get 2 solid responses I can share with you tonight. One from longtime Brookline resident Nancy Niddickman. Nancy's a close family friend and avid golfer. I know that Putterham is a spiritual place for Nancy, and I told her I'd make sure her voice is heard. So here's what she said, quote, "This town always goes after the golf course, but the golf course supports the have-nots, and it's the haves that cannot understand or accept the value of this prize that Putterham really is. Over the years, I met and bonded with firemen, telephone repair people, secretaries, policemen, construction workers. It's always been a fabulous cross-section of folks who would otherwise never have met or been exposed to each other, and then to develop an appreciation of those not like me. An accessible, affordable sport or game or whatever brings disparate folks together, one of best life's experiences, I would say." I'm sharing Nancy's words in order to say I understand what the sentiments are in the golfing community and the strong affection many Brookline residents feel for Putterham as is. There was a second response I received that arrived this morning from my father. My dad's a retired guidance counselor, clinical psychologist, and Coast Guard auxiliary captain who believes that climate change is the #1 issue facing the world. Is a golf course nature? Interesting. Given the fact that golf courses cut their grass, use all types of chemicals to control weeds and insects, use excessive amounts of water, and run their equipment and vehicles with gas, they are polluting nature. In my dad's view, which happens to be my view, the entire golf course should be returned to meadow. Meanwhile, the peat bog, which doesn't enjoy drinking pesticide-filled runoff, is running out of peat and will soon be just a regular bog. Why would anyone speak up for a peat bog? Are you kidding? It's the most productive Brookline resident of all, doing more to cool the climate than all of us town meeting members combined. Town meeting members, if you disagree with me, and especially if you have priorities that are completely different than the ones I've shared, then you should be enthusiastically supporting warrant Article 39. Now is our chance to put all options on the table. Please vote favorable action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levin. Carol. You unmute yourself, please.
All right, thank you. Carol Levin for the advisory committee. In October of 21, the town awarded a contract for a golf course landscape master plan. The petitioners would like to modify the plan's scope because it was predicated on the continued operation of an 18-hole golf course and because of concerns that the plan does not sufficiently consider alternative or ancillary recreational uses. The AC recommends a vote of no action. This will allow the community to review the results estimated to be available in December of this year of the golf course master plan before registering objections and attempting to redirect the process. The scope of the RFP was for the creation of a comprehensive plan, and I quote, "The architect consultant should be aware that golf is not the only sport that is played on the property. Other activities include Nordic ski operations, group classes, hiking, and the potential for more park-style recreation for health benefits." In other words, with the exception of the 9-hole golf course option, the concerns identified by the petitioners appear to be already incorporated into the planning process. According to the town's chief procurement officer, the scope of the existing RFP, which cannot be changed. The second part of the warrant article calls for the use of golf course enterprise funds to pay for an updated plan. It is unclear if golf course enterprise funds can be used to study the partial dismantling of the 18-hole course and its conversion to other uses. That is different than a study which looks at enhancements and complementary uses to the existing course. Other concerns expressed by the AC members included whether a 9-hole golf course could be self-supporting under the enterprise fund model and continue to contribute to the recreation director's salary. We were very concerned about disruption to and undermining of the planning and prioritization process run by staff and the Parks and Recreation Commission. We questioned whether the cannibalization of an existing and successful, the planning and prioritization, the cannibalization of an existing and successful recreational amenity is the best option for adding alternative recreational facilities. We question whether the topographical, environmental, and regulatory constraints which prevent a major repurposing of the land were well understood or considered by the petitioners, including the EPA regulations that prevent the former town incinerator land near Hammond Street from being used for anything even as benign as a playground. Excuse me.
30 seconds.
Finally, the risk of degrading the current master plan support of climate goals, including the daylighting of streams currently in culverts, expanding natural sites for water storage, and planting more trees, all in support of wetlands preservation and enhancement. To address this last point, the AC amended the original warrant Article 39 to limit consideration of alternative uses, but only to the extent that such uses do not exacerbate climate change or otherwise harm the natural environment when compared to the current uses. That language was broader than the revised language being considered
conclude,
this
Ms.
evening,
Levin.
which only protects the peatlands from further degradation.
Ms.
Even
Levin,
with that amended language, the AC
conclude.
voted no action on warrant Article 39.
Thank you. Ms. Bowman.
Hi. My name is Adrienne Bowman. I'm a town meeting member from precinct 16. And I just had a question. I'm not sure who can answer it, but I was curious as to how many tea times are actually full at Putterham? How many are booked?
Mr. Carroll?
I'll have to defer to Lee Jackson.
Lee Jackson?
Hello, my name is Lee Jackson. I'm the department head at Recreation. I just want to thank you, Adrienne Bowman, for the question. I will state in general, on a good weather day, we're 100% booked for tea times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Sandman speaking for the Select Board. Full disclosure, I am not a golfer unless you count miniature golf. The Select Board recommends, by a vote of 4-1, the Select Board recommends no action on Article 39. And I think that Ms. Levin ran through a number of the reasons, but there are 3 factors behind our vote. There's a demand among Brookline residents for an 18-hole course, just as there's a demand for hockey ice and soccer fields, even though these activities attract only a minority of the residents. But that's true of all our town-supported activities, including skating, swimming. Even so, out of a total of about 31,000 rounds of golf played in a typical year, approximately 2,500 rounds of golf are played each year by Brookline residents. The course is self-supporting, including funding for its capital needs. Not many golf courses turn a profit. A 9-hole course is likely to attract fewer golfers, and therefore it may need financial support from the town's operating budget, a prospect that should send shivers down spines. We think that the land offers adequate space for additional activities beyond golf without limiting the existing course, and we fully expect that the master plan that's already underway will point out those opportunities. Whether you're in favor or opposed to Article 39, note that a favorable vote does not ensure that the master plan will recommend conversion to a 9-hole course. It just means that the Parks Commission will instruct the consultants to pull back from the current planning, repeat much of the process, and spend more time and money to answer a question the commissioners have already set aside as impractical. Taking all of this into account, by a vote of 4-1, the Select Board recommends no action on Article 39. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. You have 5 minutes.
Clint Richmond, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 6. Thank you. I'm also chair of the Green Caucus and will incorporate their brief endorsement comments, but I'm speaking primarily for myself. Next slide, please. Here's a list of the many environmental problems associated with golf. You've heard about many of them already. I'm really going to focus on pesticide use, and I'm not making any recommendations on what the solution is for the golf course, but just talk about that. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of discussion about what a natural peat bog looks like. Here it is. This is one of the best remaining examples of a New England bog. The Green Caucus mentioned the preservation of natural habitat and the need for trees in its endorsement of Warrant Article 39. Not much of the land looks like this today. Next slide, please. You'll see that it looks like this, as you've seen in other pictures. The peat may be largely preserved underneath, but it's radically altered and contaminated from the surface to the groundwater. Next slide, please. The agrochemicals is a term that includes both pesticides and fertilizers. These are interrelated products that are used every day on the golf course. I mean, continuously on the golf course. So over the last 3 years, we've used 36 pesticide products, and those represent 29 unique chemical ingredients. 10 of those ingredients in these pesticides are fluorinated, and 8 of them meet the European definition of PFAS forever chemicals. Bifenthrin, for example, the first one listed there, is like several, is a possible carcinogen. There have been reported cancer clusters and studies of golf superintendents. Some of these pesticides are banned in Europe, or others like chlorothalonil have harmed honeybee populations, as do neonicotinoids. Next slide, please. The distribution of treatment is varied because there's lots of different surfaces within the golf course. But suffice to say that the 4 acres of greens, which is a lot of acreage really, have been treated on an average of 90 times per year. Again, this is using town provided data. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I've talked about the quality of the chemicals. Let's talk about the quantity. In this survey done in 2006 and the academic journal Sport and Society, they provided some average numbers for a US course. And you can see that, unfortunately, the Putterham numbers are 3 to 4 times larger than the average course. The blue column is total agrochemicals, fertilizer, and pesticide, and red is the pesticide sub total. There was a significant fertilizer treatment in 2021 that raised the blue number, but the more concerning one, as I've said, is the pesticides, and the Green Caucus specifically mentioned avoiding the application of pesticides. Next slide, please. So when it comes to green golf courses, there is no solution for pesticide use at golf courses. Integrated pest management is followed. We have a very dedicated and well-trained staff, but the bottom line is that golf on average uses 7 times more pesticides per acre than industrial agriculture. And I'm talking like big industrial farms in the Midwest. And that's why there's only 1 organic golf course in the entire United States. And compare that to the number of, say, organic farms or people like myself who don't use any chemicals on their lawns. There's a lot of discussion when you talk for green awards on water use, which is important, but I think it's going to be troublesome at a site like Putterham because of the many decades of chemical use, including PFAS, which has been found on the site. So anyway, I think these are the reasons to reduce the acreage devoted to golf at Putterham and to benefit the health and of the staff and the park users. And I urge you to join with the Green Caucus in voting yes on warrant article 39. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hyken.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Steve Hyken speaking for the Planning Board. The Planning Board held an initial public hearing on warrant article 39 on October 19th and heard a presentation from the proponents on the proposed expansion of the master plan and other potential uses of the golf course. And at that initial meeting, the Planning Board voted favorable action. But due to a communications lapse, it turned out that no one from the Department of Recreation or the Parks and Recreation Commission had been notified of that hearing, and therefore nobody was present to present the other views about this warrant article. So once we were made aware of this, we reopened the public hearing in order to provide for comment from the Recreation Department and members of the Recreation Commission. And at that hearing on November 2nd, we heard from members of both the commission and the staff about their concerns about warrant article 39. And as you've heard before, it turns out that the landscape master plan was already nearly complete, that it does include consideration of other recreational activities on the property, such as walking paths, hiking trails, cross-country ski trails, while maintaining the 18-hole golf course. We know that the property is challenging with well-documented constraints, that it would take a substantial amount of capital investment to stabilize the soil for other uses, whereas the golf course fits this landscape very well. So given the opportunity to hear both sides of this argument, we voted unanimously to reconsider our previous vote. And at that second hearing, we joined with other town boards in voting no action on warrant article 39. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'm not sure. Yep.
It is John Harris. I signed up. Thank you.
Thank you. It's John Harris.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is John Harris. I am a town meeting member, Precinct 8, and co-chair of Climate Action Brookline, which, along with the Green Caucus of town meeting members, endorses warrant article 39. Len Woley, Cher Duffield, and Clint Richmond discussed the climate and environmental reasons for those endorsements very thoroughly. So I'll cover what I think will be a unique angle related to personal safety. Staff at the golf course extolled their efforts to find ways that non-golfers can use the land. Laudable, but only when closed to golf. And given that the course is open for golf during all daylight hours except for Monday mornings, this means for very few hours during the golf season. Putterham Woods is an undeveloped patch of hilly, semi-old growth, fairly dense forest between the southwest corner of the golf course and Brookline Fire Station 6. The Friends of Putterham Woods would like to construct hiking trails there. So a few weekends ago, I took a walk through the woods. I walked in a circle through the center of the woods, being careful not to get too close to the stream bed that marks the boundary of the fairway. I could see golfers down below through the dense tree cover, and I hoped that given the short time I was there, that the laws of probability would protect me against errant golf balls. And in fact, no stray balls came through as I walked. But I was astonished to see, to randomly come upon 10 golf balls lying scattered widely among the leaves, each at least 200 to perhaps 250 feet from the edge of the course, and each in the open and not covered by leaves. So from this year, half were the white balls that golfers use on the fairway, and half were the fluorescent yellow balls that players rent by the bucket at the driving range. The balls had flown hundreds of feet into Putterham Woods from the north through the fairway golfers, through dozens of tall trees, and from the east, from the driving range, either above a tall mesh fence or more likely hit wildly to the left before the fence began, and then through dozens of trees. Golf balls are small and hard and can travel very fast. Amateur golfers can hit them at 110 to 150 miles an hour. Flying golf balls can be a severe hazard. Several sources say that up to 40,000 people a year seek medical attention caused by flying golf balls, most often for concussions or facial or forehead impact. And golf takes a lot of territory, far beyond the actual area of play, the fairway and the green. And town staff have acknowledged that stray balls are more likely at a municipal course because many of the players are beginners or novices. For reasons of personal safety, I simply cannot understand why the Friends of Putterham Woods opposes warrant Article 39. The only ways to ensure the safety of users at the periphery, such as Putterham Woods, and really for other non-golfers, is either to further reduce the golfing hours in season or to increase the physical distance between golfers and others by reducing the acreage allotted to be golfed. The planning process for warrant Article 39 allows consideration of both responses. In conclusion, for reasons of personal safety, as well as the environmental reasons that led to endorsement by Climate Action Brookline and the Green Caucus of town meeting members, I recommend you vote favorable action on warrant Article 39. Thank you.
Thank you. A call on David Ford.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First off, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Dave Ford, and I am the Family and Consumer Science teacher and the boys varsity golf coach at Brookline High. As I mentioned during public comment at Putterham back in the fall, there were two things that helped kids physically and emotionally during the pandemic. Those were cooking and golf. Fortunately, I have the pleasure of being a part of both of those outlets as a culinary arts teacher at BHS for the past 25 years and the golf coach for the past 5. From a golf perspective, if you look at the numbers across the country over the past 3 years, it has exploded in popularity, mainly due to the lack of availability of other activities during the pandemic. Couple that with the popularity of golf on mainstream media, celebrating the talents of our young pro golfers kids can relate to, and a major USG event in town, and Brookline is no exception. To take those outlets and opportunities away or limit them by making Putterham a 9-hole course, many aspiring junior golfers find themselves without a space to emulate who they admire in golf the most. I have 2 teenage sons who both played every sport possible in Brookline. Is a successful travel basketball player and baseball player in town. And before turning to golf after his freshman year of high school, worked extremely hard, and Putterham was a space that allowed him to practice and work on his craft. Golf team, and as a collegian was named MVP last year, and hopefully we sport under the sun in Brookline. But unlike my older son, the pandemic left him love for the game of golf, and it all started and continues to grow at Putterham. Two-year varsity player 16th in the state and 48th in the Northeast. I share this with you because craft, and then where they continue to do so, along with many aspiring junior golfers in 9-hole course. Build a successful golf program. The high school golf program in town as a whole, which will eventually result in a program and Springs growth rentals expenses per day for transporting players to and from practices and matches, not to mention the additional liability to transport the kids to and from the venues. Having a local golf course like Putterham available to work in concert with the schools, those expenses and safety concerns are kept at a minimum to non-existent. The current collaboration that we have with Putterham and the high school program has been outstanding in providing opportunities for junior golfers to play and practice at a minimal expense that a lot of other towns and school districts just don't have.
Please conclude.
From a personal perspective, a local golf course with familiar faces is welcoming. I've been in Brookline for 25 years now as an educator and a resident. And it's nice to see former players, alumni, and BHS working at Putterham. By turning it into a 9-hole course, those jobs and camaraderie, those familiar faces are limited to select few or worse, no longer exist.
Please conclude, Mr. Ford.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Please vote no on this warrant and think of the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple of questions. Mr. Berger, you've been very patient. Michael Berger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Berger, Precinct 15. I have a question about this parcel. We've been calling it the golf course, but actually its formal name for many years was Putterham Meadows. And we focused here in this discussion on its use as a golf course. But Putterham Meadows has been an open space resource, an important part of the Brookline open space plan. So there's another plan for this parcel besides the recreation plan. It's called the Brookline Open Space Plan. That's updated every 5 years. I would like to ask the Director of Parks and Open Space, how does the Brookline Open Space Plan treat this particular parcel?
Ms. Jackson?
Hello, Lee Jackson, Recreation Director. I believe Mr. Michael Berger called on the Parks and Open Space Director, which is separate from Recreation. I will answer that under the town guidance, the Recreation Department manages the golf course and open space, and that includes Putterham Woods. Thank you.
Ms. Wu?
Chi Wu, town meeting member, precinct 7. I had a question, I think for the petitioners. In the Ms. Freeman's presentation, there was mention of the fact that the golf course used to pay $200,000 to the town for the year per year, and then the amount gradually declined and now is zero. I want to confirm, are we basically saying that we're subsidizing the golf course in terms of a rental fee that is the equivalent of whatever $200,000 is in today's dollars, like 300, 400,000?
I'm not quite sure what you, the golf course is self-sustaining through the enterprise fund. And it doesn't.
Ms. Goldsmith has her hand raised. She's one of the petitioners. If she could answer my question, please.
Yeah, Ms. Goldsmith.
Hi, thank you. Jennifer Goldsmith, Precinct 11. Hi, friends and neighbors. I hope everyone is well tonight. And thank you for taking the time to think about this important question. This question of self-sustaining, or this mythology really is important. My co-petitioners talked about this initially, but there's something that a lot of us are familiar with. It's called opportunity cost. So there are sort of two pieces to this. Chi-Chi's question about what happened to the money that used to be paid by the golf course to the town, and what does it mean to be self-sustaining? So to be self-sustaining suggests that it's zero sum. The budgets for the golf course are budgeted revenue to equal expense every year. It goes up about 10% every year, far in excess actually of what our other town budgets go up. And they've increased their staffing actually by 130% in 5 years, from 3 FTEs to 5 to 7, while we've been, suffering to try to keep our staffing constant in other places. But because they're self-contained, we don't see the burden of that. But what we do see is that costs, that the golf course isn't contributing financially to the town. So when the enterprise budget model was set up, it was set up a lot like a utility, so that we weren't going to bear the burden, but we weren't going to benefit from the cost. But at that time, there was this assumption, well, we could be doing something else with this land. It wasn't a golf course for years of its existence. It didn't always have to be a golf course. So what's the compensation for that? It was $200,000. Over time, there were some fallow years, or you could say the budgets weren't managed well, whatever it was, they weren't able to maintain the commitment that they had. And then it sort of disappeared around 2003 without further mention. So in the years that we've been, as we did last May, really struggling to cover the costs for sidewalk clearance for $150,000, they were building a war chest. Now that war chest, you could say, is theirs, they're self-sustaining, it's theirs to keep. But you could also say, why isn't that contributing for some of the costs to the town? You could also ask the question, this is an important one, there's only 4 hours a week, 3 hours a week actually, that the golf course is officially open to the public. That's Monday mornings. When we had our tour there on a Monday morning, the petitioners, it turned out that the golf course had actually rented the space to an external group. So our very limited private time was being paid to the golf course for other users. One might say, well, maybe this is an answer, Mr. Gatsby. I'm really sorry. So one might say, sure, there's self-sustaining. No, I promise you it is. I promise you, please, just if you can let me finish my sentence.
Well, you've been 2.5 minutes and we haven't had an answer to the question.
So self-sustaining is subjective is what I'm saying, because we're not thinking about opportunity cost and the revenue that's made during the very few hours of the week that it's meant for public use are being retained by the golf course. You might at least say when that group of state troopers came and rented the public time, those dollars could be paid back to the town for the lost public use.
I have a point of order. Mr. Tuckman.
All right. I think this person, rather than answering question, has been going on at least 2 to 3 minutes. Soon she will have more than even the folks who've requested 5 minutes. I think we should get on with this. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Goldsmith, wrap up, please.
Thank you. I guess the final point I would make is there are funds coming in that could be coming back to the town. The time that's being taken from town access and rented out to other people. But the process, this very narrow definition of a master plan, didn't allow itself to look more broadly at what do we mean by opportunity cost and what do we mean by potential contribution going forward. So thank you for your patience. But I think this is another one of those questions that a more transparent and thorough process that looked not just at 18 holes and not just at exactly as is today, but what's possible could cover and will cover if you support this warrant article. Thanks very much.
Ms. Goff, do you have comments about this discussion?
Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator. I believe what the question was about was the town fee that used to be transmitted to the general fund. That was discontinued in 2014. It was essentially the surplus of the projected surplus of the golf course that was then transmitted to the town. That surplus had been diminished over the years, or hovering around $40,000 when it was discontinued, in order to basically build fund balance so that if there was a bad weather year, there would be funds that would allow the golf course to not rely on the general fund, which has happened in the past when there was a negative storm, negative weather year.
Thank you. Mr. Swartz.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to be clear, if this.
Who are you?
Chuck Swartz, Precinct 9.
I thought so.
Yep, thank you. If this article were to pass, and if the expanded scope were to come back and recommend a different use for the course, cutting it back to 9 holes, that would have to pass town meeting again. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Town council?
Good evening, Joe Callahan, Town Council. Yes, it would. There are public land protection constraints, such as petitioners refer to Article 97. But here, another one would include the prior public use doctrine. So this land has been put to the use of a golf course. To change that use, you'd need the permission of the executive branch and the legislative branch to change that use. So you would need approval of the select board, the Park and Rec Commission, and town meeting to change the use from golf to something inconsistent with golf.
Thank you, Mr. Leibovitz. Alec, yeah.
Hello, Alec Leibovitz, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I wanted to pose a couple questions to the petitioners just to follow up on some of the arguments we've heard so far tonight. I've heard it posited by some that this land seems to be uniquely suited for the usage of a golf course, and that other types of usage may compromise some of the environmental benefits. I'd be curious to hear the petitioner's response to that point, and also would be curious if there's any evidence historically that the land has been used for other purposes and how that was assessed by the town. I'm also wondering if we know when
let's deal with your questions one at a time, sir. Ms. Friedman. Wendy.
Thank you. Wendy Friedman, Precinct 5. Okay, so the first question I think was about the environmental uses. So I'm not sure I completely remember the question now. So I mean, our understanding is that to maximize the environmental benefits, the peat that's here, that the land needs to be wet, that peat needs to be wet. So for instance, if you want to get certified, if you want to have peat certified for carbon sequestration, we would not qualify for that in its current condition because of the drainage that we do. The first thing that they actually say that you have to do if you want to qualify for carbon sequestration is to remove any drainage that's been put there. So I think the conditions are not great for golf. That's why it's been, they've been battling the drainage issue for as long as it's been a golf course, and will continue to battle it in the master plan. But it's also not in its best state environmentally because of this issue. The second thing I think you asked was about historical uses, and I don't know the complete history, but what we have looked into is that when these parcels were originally allocated to the town for use, when they were acquired, and they were acquired slowly over time, so the land grew, the size of this golf course and this land grew over time, they were initially set aside for playground use. So that was what was in the language of why this land was being acquired to the town. It was for use of as a playground. And somebody else with a better memory than me can tell you the date. Maybe it was like in 1918 or something like that. And it wasn't until the 30s, I think, that it was turned over to golf course use. So initially it was for playgrounds. And when it was turned over for playground, for golf course use, there was actually quite a bit of an outcry from people who had been using it. I think it was also a bird sanctuary, now that I'm remembering our timeline. That there was a bit of an outcry that that turning it into a golf course was going to destroy the bird sanctuary.
Okay, I think you've responded adequately.
Okay, thank you. You got it.
Mr. Leibovitz, did you have another question? I have it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator, and thank you to the petitioner for that answer. My other question pertains to the description by the moderators of the master planning process. So if I'm understanding correctly, the contention is that there was never any consideration of options excluding an 18-hole golf course, or that didn't include an 18-hole golf course. And if that is correct, I'm wondering, do we know when the last time the usage of this land was comprehensively evaluated without that framing?
Ms. Jackson?
Good evening, Lee Jackson, Recreation Director. Thank you, Alec. I would say I've been here for 5 years. We were charged with examining the golf course as an 18-hole golf course in this RFP and master plan, which does consider additional uses as well. Before I was present here, I don't know the answer to what would have been considered. Someone else with longevity in the town would likely know that answer. Thank you.
I'm not sure who. Yes, Ms. Bernard, you have a point of order.
Yes, Lauren Bernard, Commissioner of Parks and Recreation. I feel like some of these questions should be directed to the commissioners. And I would recommend that some of them be referred to Antonia Bellalta, who does have longevity on the commission and can probably answer these questions.
Well, thank you very much, but there's a motion to call the question. And that's made by Ms. Mariarch and seconded by Mr. Snyder. This is a motion for the question. It requires a 2/3 vote. If you vote in favor, it will terminate the debate and we'll proceed to a vote on the main motion. I have the following people signed up to speak in favor of the proposal: Mr. Ishak, Mr. Tamayo, Ms. Goldsmith, Mr. Lowe, Mr. Koltoff. Following people are signed up to speak in opposition to the motion: Ms. Cunningham, Ms. Bernard, Mr. Bell, Mr. Flanagan, Ms. Flanagan, I'm sorry, Mr. Sills, Mr. Perlman, Ms. Murphy, Mr. Thal, Ms. Thal, Mr. Rudrehill, Mr. Tuckman, Ms. Hillman, Mr. Saltzman, Ms. Pelkey, Bennett Davis, a non-town meeting member, Mr. Silverberg, Mr. Albuquerque, Richard Murphy, Arlene Madison, a non-town meeting member, and the queue, the chat monitor's queue has Christine Kovac with a comment in support of the article, Mr. Sandman with a question, Ms. Duffield with a question, Ms. Hillman with a question, Mr. Grossman, Perry Grossman with a question. Have a vote on the motion for the question. Has a count, please.
162 yes, 70 no, 10 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 162 in favor, 70 opposed, and 10 abstentions. On the motion on page 39-9, main motion, Article 39, to broaden the scope of the golf course, asking the Park and Rec to broaden the scope of the golf course landscape master plan and so forth, in the words of the resolution. We'll now take a vote. The count.
We have 85 yes.
Motion fails by a vote of 85 in favor, 147 opposed, and 15 abstentions. We now turn to Article 26 and the remaining CEAB articles. And hopefully we'll get through at least a couple of them this evening. Before we proceed down this path, I have to bring up a matter of some delicacy. On the speakers list for all of these articles, you will find Mr. Gray, Ms. Cunningham, Ms. Stahl, and most of them, Mr. Mendels. Those individuals are the principals of a nonprofit organization called Zero Carbon Mass, the purpose of which is to lobby for electrification. And this is obviously relevant to the articles that are being presented by Mr. Gray and his colleagues. And I'm certain that while I'd make no judgment about whether the association with this organization constitutes a conflict of interest, it certainly should have been disclosed by these individuals before they addressed town meeting on the earlier articles in this chain of articles. I don't want to have 4 explanations, but I will accept a disclosure from Mr. Gray or whoever he designates for that purpose of what this organization is about and the roles of these 4 key advocates in that organization. Mr. Gray? Mr. Yassin, you have a point of order?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, my name is Martin Yassin, and I'm from Precinct 17. And it has come to my attention as I've been reading the emails in the town meeting members that in point of fact, the articles 26, 28, and 29 were really not well known and well understood by the town meeting members. And it struck me that these articles have very far-reaching scope, both financially and intrusively in the lives, not just of the town meeting members, but of the entire citizenry of the town.
Well, so far, Mr. Yassin, you have not made a point of order. Would you get to your point
I'm
of order,
sorry.
please?
Okay, I will make a point of order. I'm sorry, sir. I wanted to preface this. So Brookline has a bylaw, which can be found on the Brookline bylaws booklet on page 131, and it is section 3.22. And its heading is the public's right to be heard on warrant articles. And it says that any committee, as defined in section 1.1.4, before taking its first or only vote with respect to an article on the warrant, must hold a duly noticed public hearing with respect to the article, and the committee's permanent record must record that a duly noticed public hearing with respect to such article occurred before such vote. In this regard, I think it's important to understand that in order for this bylaw to have appeared and had become part of Brookline's bylaws, it had to be vetted by the Attorney General's Office of
Well,
Massachusetts.
we know that, Mr. Yassin.
Okay, I didn't know what people know, so I'm sorry about that.
Your point is that ZIAB did not hold a public hearing before it voted on these warrant articles. Is that correct?
That is my point. And may I make one other point? And that is that with the demise of the Brookline tab and newspaper journalism in broadly in Massachusetts, but here in Brookline, I think there was very limited opportunity.
But no, that's not a point of order. That's not a point of order, Mr. Yassin.
Okay.
Your point is that there was a violation of section 3.22 of the town bylaws by the sponsor of these articles. Is that correct?
That is, and that I felt that it's very, very important.
Well, that's fine. Let's hear from town council about in response to that point of order.
Good evening, Joe Callahan, Town Council.
We're going to deal with one point of order at a time, Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Callahan, Town Council. Jonathan Simpson and John Mareschi have been the town council that are most familiar with and are able to answer this question. So I'd ask you to refer this question to Jonathan Simpson, Associate Town Council.
That's fine. Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Jonathan Simpson, Associate Town Council for the town of Brookline. I do not believe that my understanding of the run-up to town meeting was that ZIAB, to the extent it voted on these articles at all, did so prior to their being placed on the warrant, as they were the petitioners and the people that filed the warrant articles in the first place. The bylaw section that Mr. Yassin refers to the extent it mandates any behavior, it only applies to articles once they're on the warrant. I do not believe that ZIAB took a position or took a vote on the warrant articles subsequent to their being placed on the warrant. Therefore, the requirements of 322 are not triggered. Moreover, I would strongly disagree with any contention that Mr. Yassin's point of order could ever result in not hearing this warrant article if the petitioners filed their warrant article with the 10 signatures required by section 2.1.13 of our general bylaws that mandate that the select board put any warrant article on the warrant if it's submitted with 10 signatures, which the ZIAB's articles all were. And once it's on the warrant, the state statutory scheme requires that the town take it up unless it's not moved or something, anything like that. So again, I do not believe that 322 requires that this point of order requires anything other than hearing the warrant article today.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver, you have a point of personal privilege, question of privilege.
Yes, thank you. Ann Weaver, town meeting member, precinct 11. I just want to comment because I think it needs to be noted in the record that after the vote on the last warrant article 39, one of the town meeting members on screen, I don't know how to put this, gave the finger on view on camera. That was the person was one of the people who had argued against the warrant article, and after the vote had been read. This person gave the finger on camera, obviously quite deliberately, and I found that that just was inappropriate in terms of how we're supposed to be conducting ourselves during town meeting. And I
That's
wanted to
certainly-
make a note of that.
Certainly
Thank you.
inappropriate, and if the moderator had seen it, that he would have commented. Ms. Linos, you have a point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I definitely welcome your request for sort of disclosure of conflict of interest, but the moderator, I believe, in the previous moderator, Madam Moderator, had mentioned that it's still optional. I mean, I'm very much in favor of the warrant articles that we'll be discussing, 34, 35, but I wanted to understand if there was something specific. I don't imagine there's a financial interest or something specific why you are requesting for this conflict of interest disclosure, or if I've misunderstood and this is required of all of us. Thank you.
Well, Ms. Linos, for a cynic, I would say that the success of the principals in this organization in engineering these articles through town meeting will enhance their ability to raise money for their nonprofit. I'm not a cynic, of course, but that is one of the reasons why town meeting should have disclosed to it what the relationship is and what the circumstances are, and town meeting can then decide the extent to which that undermines the credibility of these proponents. So let's hear from Mr. Gray.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. As I will note that first of all, it's correct.
Who are you?
I'm Jesse Gray. I'm Jesse Gray. I'm wearing an Electrify Everything sweatshirt. I am the chair of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board and a town meeting member from Precinct 10 and a principal at Zero Carbon MA, along with Wendy Stahl, David Mendels, and Lisa Cunningham, as you mentioned. Zero Carbon MA started unofficially in 2019 when, after I initially had worked with Werner Lowy to draft warrant article 19, fossil fuel free, I realized that I would need some additional legal assistance. And in defending that article as it was under attack during Attorney General review, and in the policy development of all of the articles that I have filed since then, I have relied on the legal assistance of Miaris Harrington, which serves as the town counsel for many towns, and they're a municipal law firm located in Wellesley. Mounted, it became unsustainable. To do the to drive climate action forward in this town, and provide for organized funding of that were appointed by the select board to the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. We filed disclosures of our relationship with Zero Carbon MA. And I want to make a final point, which is it feels somewhat unusual that the beginning of a warrant article would commence with an unannounced, with no prior warning, request for a disclosure, which is not required. And while I make no claim about the motivation for that request, I will say that I think it is in line with what I read in the room as a totally fair and appropriate concern about the level of change that is required to solve this problem. And while we so often worry about the amount of change that will be required to solve this problem, what we forget is that the world will change whether we like it or not.
Mr. Gray, I don't think we need a lecture about climate issues. I'm more interested in your relationship to this organization and whether it impacts your role as an advocate. And I think town meeting can make up its own mind about whether you've adequately disclosed your organization and its functions. And let's move on. Mr. Benson.
Hi, Jeffrey Benson, Precinct 3. Point of order regarding the lack of clarity to Ms. Linos's question before. And so I just want to be clear about this. We are going to vote on whether we should disclose conflicts of interest. And I think that's a reasonable thing for us to do. I'm hoping we all vote for that. And I'm still struggling with why you chose to say it this time when there was no need for you to say it, when it is not yet required for anyone to disclose. And you chose to do that. I'm wondering if you're just going to do that every time.
Hold on. The warrant articles that you're referring to are 34 and 35. They are reflected in revisions relating to conflicts of interest in the town meeting handbook, which is the set of rules by which our town meeting is run. And if you will look at your town meeting handbook, give me just a moment. I will give you a book and page number here. Look on page 26 of the town meeting handbook, and you'll see virtually what Article 34 is all about. And so we are already supposedly operating under those rules. Let's move along. Mr. Spritz, I'm not going to take that motion. Move to Article 26. The main motion under Article 26 is offered by the Advisory Committee. It's actually moved by Mr. Gray, seconded by Ms. Hardebeck. On page 7 of supplement number 1 is a resolution urging the Massachusetts legislature to enact legislation to add a gas utility surcharge to the bill of all properties served by a gas utility, and so forth. In the words of the motion, going over to the bottom of page 8. There is an amendment offered by Mr. Margolis, seconded by Ms. Bignami. It's on supplement 2, pages 1 and 2, but you can, if you turn to page 8 of supplement number 1, the main motion, I'll tell you what the amendment would affect, and it's a very simple change. A little below halfway down the page, there is a paragraph that begins, "Therefore be it resolved," etc. And the third line of that paragraph reads, well, just reading the paragraph, that the Brookline Town Meeting hereby requests that the Massachusetts legislature enact legislation that will allow Brookline and any other city or town in Massachusetts to enact local legislation. The amendment would insert at that point, following an affirmative vote by its electorate, then presuming to enable, etc. So that the amendment would require that, or would add the requirement that a townwide vote be taken before the this could move forward. I call on Ms. Stahl. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, I do have some slides. I'm Wendy Stahl, member of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. Thank you. Warrant Article 26 was originally presented as a home rule petition, but has been amended to a resolution after coming to an agreement with the Advisory Committee on a motion brought there. Advisory overwhelmingly supported this article as amended. Next slide. The resolution you are voting on tonight asks for the state legislature to craft a law that would allow Brookline and any other town that wanted to add a surcharge to their gas bills to pay for programs that would reduce emissions. The resolution asks for low-income exemptions to this surcharge as well. This article asks the legislature to consider taking an action that would allow us to opt in or not at a later date. This article does not establish the surcharge and does not bind us into accepting a surcharge should the legislature end up doing what we ask. In short, this is non-binding. Next slide. The resolution is written in a way that strongly advises the legislature to adopt the language of our original home rule petition when crafting a statewide opt-in policy. The explanation also quotes our home rule petition. Our petition set a minimum exemption level of 200% AMI and a maximum surcharge of 25%, but left the exact levels to be determined by town meeting. It allowed gas companies to finance non-pipeline alternatives such as solar panels and batteries, heat pumps, and electric appliances that would replace or supplement gas-powered appliances. And lastly, it created an emissions reduction fund where the proceeds from this surcharge would be deposited. Next slide. Of note, Vermont Gas has already taken a step similar to what we proposed for National Grid in our petition. The gas company is providing electric heat pump water heaters to all of their customers for purchase or lease with on-bill financing. Next slide. The exemptions in our original home rule petition, which the resolution asks the legislature to take into consideration, are households earning less than 200% of the area median income, households already on a reduced rate from the utility, as well as any other group town meeting chooses to exempt. Next slide. 200% AMI for 2022 looks like this, and these numbers increase every year. The funds raised from this proposed policy would be used to help everyone, regardless of income level. But by providing exemptions, we are attempting to shoulder the financial responsibility on those who can more afford to carry it. Next slide. The surcharge can be any number. There is no specific level suggested, merely a suggested ceiling. It could be 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%. It could be $2 a month or $10 a month. And remember, the surcharge will be negligible during the non-heating months when gas is not used to heat buildings. Next slide. We need a program like this because burning gas in our buildings is responsible for 1/3 of our town's carbon emissions. We need to transition off gas to meet our climate commitment of reducing our emissions 50% in 7 years and getting to net zero by 2040. And importantly, by increasing the cost of gas to reflect its true cost, including the environmental impact, this type of program would provide a source of funding to help those who cannot easily transition off gas. Next slide. Here is what we propose the emissions reduction fund to look like. Keep in mind the legislature will craft their own version of this policy, but the resolution asks them to adhere to our language as closely as possible. Our recommendation is that the fund be modeled after the Community Preservation Fund, which the town already has established. It would be managed by the town treasurer, and expenditures would be recommended by a designated board. For the Community Preservation Fund, it's the Community Preservation Board. Recommendations are made by the established board. Expenditures are approved by town meeting. Different from the Community Preservation Fund, we also have suggested the Emissions Reduction Fund have a yearly cap, and as a final measure of accountability, town meeting could choose to end the fund for any reason after a minimum of 5 years. Next slide. The proceeds from a program like this would fund emissions reduction efforts, including, for example, creating incentives to help us transition off gas, programming support to help us take full advantage of state and federal incentives to get off gas, hiring professional project managers to guide the process of transitioning off gas, and public education campaigns to highlight the importance of transitioning off gas. Next slide. Before this can be implemented, 4 things need to happen. Town meeting has to approve this resolution tonight. The legislature has to craft legislation creating a program that would allow municipalities to opt in. The legislature has to pass that legislation. Then town meeting can vote to opt in and implement the statewide legislation. I will repeat. Lead us into accepting a surcharge should the legislature end up doing what we ask. Brookline, we will simply not opt into that policy. Next slide. Article 26. Ask the state to write legislation that would allow us to equitably fund emissions reduction programs in Brookline. Thank you.
Mr. Benka, you have 6 minutes. Richard Benka.
Thank you. Dick Benka, Precinct 14. There's been a good deal of discussion about fairness at this town meeting, and I'll be speaking on 2 articles, Article 26 and 28, that particularly violate one fundamental aspect of fair play. With these articles, we would be retroactively penalizing investments that our neighbors were encouraged to make for the benefit of the environment. The very things we'd be penalizing include efficiency and pollution reduction measures that were undertaken with no suggestion until now that they'd be punished. Please ask yourselves, how many of you live in buildings where natural gas service has been installed and maintained in good faith? But we would be saying, sorry, it's too bad that you, guided by the best intentions, and perhaps even incentivized by state-approved mass save rebates, and using the best available technology, replaced polluting oil with cleaner natural gas, and even put in a high-efficiency gas boiler or furnace, and might even be using it just to supplement heat pumps, and that it may have 10 or 20 or 25 years of useful life left. Now we're going to start fining you after the fact for that past decision that you made for the best of reasons. There's no 25% surcharge for those who stuck with oil, but we're going to artificially increase your cost to use natural gas by up to 25%. And while we're at it, we're even going to increase your property taxes because you put in that high efficiency furnace before we decided we wanted to penalize you for having it. Of course, we're giving you a choice. You can either rip it out and scrap thousands of dollars of equipment with decades of useful life remaining, if you can find a contractor, or you can pay thousands of dollars of penalties in gas and property tax surcharges over that same time period. Folks, that's just plain wrong. And indeed, petitioners have implicitly acknowledged that it's wrong. Just 18 months ago, we passed a warrant article to require fossil fuel-free installations in new construction and significant renovations requiring special permits. I voted for that. Climate change is real, and the proposal was fair. It applied to future installations where those affected would know the impact. In fact, some of the very petitioners of the current articles stated that existing properties were being, quote, protected, and owners would be given the option to go fossil fuel free at the time of a major construction project, when it's, quote, practical and cost effective. Even now, petitioners in their descriptions of Article 25, 26, and 28, just look at your combined reports, say we should avoid purchasing fossil fuel equipment when an appliance or heating system in an existing building, quote, needs to be replaced. And in comments to the advisory committee and to town meeting, they said the same things. In new houses and buildings, when oil systems are decommissioned and at the end of life of the boiler or furnace. But Articles 26 and 28 hit already installed existing equipment, not just decisions on future installations. So on today's listserv, we see petitioners and proponents again falling back on the argument that We're just seeking authorization. We can decide details later. The issue with 26 and 28, however, is not a matter of tweaking, playing with exemptions. Unfairness is at the very core of these articles. They would penalize equipment that is already in place. The fundamental approach is to retroactively punish good faith investments that people have already made in their properties. Town meeting's approval would also be sending detrimental messages to residents. We'd be saying that we're willing to impose tax surcharges when natural gas rates have already increased by 69% in the last year, and a further 25% surcharge would mean that rates would nearly double. And even residents who might get relief from 26 would be forced to annually turn over certification of their incomes to National Grid. We'd be sending these messages when the town is hoping to persuade voters to pass debt exclusions and operating overrides. And we'd also be sending a message to the business community, where commercial tenants will get hit as rate and tax surcharges are passed through with no vehicle for relief. We already have empty storefronts. So what should we do? Mass Save now offers $10,000 to $15,000 rebates for heat pump installations and interest-free 7-year loans. This is a $3.9 billion program. We're already paying for it through our utility rates. And there will also be tax credits and rebates under the Federal Inflation Reduction Act of 2022.
You have 1 minute.
Let's take advantage of these programs. Let's stick reminders in the town's regular mailings. But to conclude, let's not penalize ex post facto decisions that have already been made for the best of reasons, that only options available, and that may even have been encouraged by state-approved policies. The amendment calling for a townwide vote is a step in the right direction, and I support it. But ultimately, I urge you to vote no action, to vote for fairness. Thank you.
Quebec.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Gordon will be speaking on this article.
Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Gordon, Precinct 1 Town Meeting Member and a member of the Advisory Committee, speaking for the Advisory Committee. As amended, Article 26 is a resolution urging the Massachusetts Legislature to enact statewide legislation to allow towns and cities to add a gas utility surcharge to the bills of gas utility customers. Surcharge is designed to incentivize demand reduction and help fund local decarbonization efforts, thus creating an overall benefit for the consumers who pay the surcharge. To make our legislative history clear, and as a guide to our delegation and to the state legislature more broadly, the language of the Home Rule petition, essentially as printed in the warrant, is attached as an exhibit to the resolution. The resolution itself does not specify the details of how a surcharge would be levied or what exemptions might apply. We leave that to the legislature. Article 26 was brought as a Home Rule petition, but through a productive give and take among the petitioners and the Advisory Committee, consensus was reached to petition the legislature more broadly. The need for funding for decarbonization efforts is not unique to Brookline. The Advisory Committee recognized that Brookline is one of 257 cities and towns in Massachusetts whose residents use natural gas. We saw the benefit of seeking state legislation that would allow any municipality to opt into a surcharge that would benefit local efforts to meet a net zero emissions goal. As with other articles brought by ZAB, multiple steps remain before any change is enacted. Should enabling legislation become law, establishing local policy and establishing a tax rate, in each case consistent with state law, would require future local action. The article as amended has strong support from the Advisory Committee, which recommends favorable action by a vote of 19 in favor, 4 opposed, and with 3 abstentions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Selwyn. Lee.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Lee Selwyn. I'm a town meeting member from precinct 13. I'm a member of the advisory committee, but I'm speaking for myself. Over the last several days, and it's only, Mr. Moderator, I understand I have 6 minutes. Over the last several days, there's been a flurry of emails from proponents to the effect that most Brookline residents would not be subject to these taxes because of the exemptions. And in fact, some of the proponents actually sent emails out to town meeting members advising them to inform their constituents to that end. And I wanted to look at these proposed exemptions more in depth. So we have the next slide. The exemptions that are being proposed would exclude from the tax any household whose income level is at 200% of AMI or below. In 2023, a family of 4 with 200% AMI income would be approximately $300,000. Including roughly 80% of all Brookline using household.
Mr. Selwyn, motion before.
Mr. Moderator, the 200% is included in the original language, which is it's in the explanation of the motion, but it's referenced in the motion. And
Well, it's not in the motion before town meeting, Mr. Selwyn.
It's the motion before town meeting and asks the state to use the original language as a guide, and that's the base. It's referenced in the explanation contains the original language, which includes the 200% AMI.
Well, it's a mystery to me. Go ahead.
Next slide. So to focus on these exemptions more directly, the way this would work as envisioned by the proponents is that if you are a customer of National Grid, if you get your gas bill from National Grid, National Grid would administer the exemptions. You would apply to National Grid for the exemption. You would provide a copy of your tax return or some other evidence of income. And if you qualify, you would the tax would not apply. If you are a tenant in a building where the heat is provided as part of the rent, or if you're a condo owner where the heat is provided, is billed to the condo association. Next slide, please. Then the process is a little more complicated as envisioned by petitioners. Since the customer there, the landlord or the condo association would pay the bill, if a household qualified for the exemption, they could apply to the town through some not yet specified process for a refund of their portion of the tax And somehow the town would be required to administer this, again, collecting income tax and other income information, and perhaps from as many as 15,000 or so individual households. I wanted to look at this 200% AMI. No other low-income assistance I could find has a definition of low income that is even remotely close to what is being proposed here. Next slide. So we start out with the HUD, Housing and Urban Development standards for low income, and their numbers are, you know, in the range depending on household size and which level of low income, anywhere from 31,000 on up to, for a family of 5 at the 80% level, 130,000. But the numbers being proposed here would run up again using an estimated 2023 AMI figures of as much as 300,000 for a family of 4 and even more for a family of 5. Next slide. There are various tax exemption programs under Chapter 59. Some have income means tests. And again, we're looking at numbers that are just enormously smaller than the exclusion threshold that is envisioned by this proposed home rule petition. Next slide. The Community Preservation Act has an exemption program, again, with income levels that are a small fraction of what the exemption levels would be under these articles. Next slide. Some other Brookline low-income programs that I've identified also have exemption levels or qualification levels way below the ZAB proposals. Next slide. Remember, 2 years ago, passed a home rule petition, which has not yet been acted on, provide a senior citizen property tax exemption. And again, qualification there, numbers in the range of 64 to 96,000 using 2023 equivalent figures, way lower than the figures that are being proposed here. Next slide.
Now, Mr. Selwyn, I've given you an extra minute because of my interruption earlier, but it's now 7 minutes and it's time for you to wrap up.
All right, let's go I'm sorry. Next slide, please.
Now, that's not wrapping up, I don't think.
This is the wrap up here. The real purpose here is, in my view, not climate, not discouragement of fossil fuels, but rather essentially, because if it were, we would have, we wouldn't exclude 80% of households from the incentives. Instead, it's simply a backdoor method. And in fact, the ZAB website refers to it as a backdoor carbon tax for the rich.
Okay, Mr. Selwyn, please conclude.
All right, next
Thank you.
slide. Did I have 30 more seconds?
Nope. You've
All right.
already had 8.5 minutes.
I apologize. All right, thank you very much.
Yes, that's your apology is accepted. Mr. Margolis, would you speak briefly to your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will be brief. First of all, a possible conflict of interest. If this warrant article and Article 28 pass, I may have to pay money. What does the amendment do? As the assistant moderator told you at the beginning of this discussion, it would simply require that there be a townwide vote before Article 26 can be put into effect as binding if it comes back from the legislature. Why do this? Because more democracy is better than any other cure for the ills of democracy. Many of our constituents have expressed unhappiness with the process or the result in the development of Articles 26 and 28. A townwide vote would provide an opportunity to win them back and convince them that Article 6 really is a good idea. So we should leave the decision whether to impose a new charge to the voters, which, by the way, is what Article 28 would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Englander, but before you speak, Mr. Englander, you are deeply immersed in the electrification business, and I think it would be wise of you to disclose your interest in electrification, which is what these articles are all about, before you speak, and I won't count that against your time.
Okay, well, I'm Scott Englander, Precinct 6. I am a lifelong energy professional, and I have my own practice called Logwood Energy Group, which is an energy consulting practice. I advise clients on electricity market economics and renewable resources, regulatory policy, power system operations, and energy procurement. I also am a co-founder of a early stage energy startup that is developing software to optimize the charging of electric fleet vehicles.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. And thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. So despite being a lifelong professional, I have no pesky charts for you tonight, but I am here to urge you to vote yes on the motion offered by the Advisory Committee. It's a resolution requesting the legislature to allow Brookline and any other community to be able to add a surcharge to be determined on methane gas to fund emissions reductions. I commend the AC for working with the petitioners to develop the motion, which provides flexibility to our legislators and a future public process to get the. Given the encouraging progress we're continuing to make decarbonizing New England's regional power system, the bulk of our emissions now come from transportation and buildings. With nearly all of our buildings using fossil gas, we don't need a greenhouse gas inventory to tell us where to focus. To decarbonize our buildings, it'll take money to address the many barriers to electrification. The tax credits of the Inflation Reduction Act, mass save incentives, and zero interest loans are a huge help, but we risk that money through future public process will help address those challenges. Talk is cheap, but if fighting climate change is a real Brookline priority, we need to spend real money on it. As anyone who's worked on cost allocation will know, there's no right way to allocate costs, but some approaches are more efficient or more fair than others. When we burn gas, other members or future members of our community bear the impacts, whether that's from breathing air pollution or from climate change. And right now, we pay absolutely nothing to compensate them for the harm we cause when buildings burn gas. And that's, I'm going to use a technical term here, effed up. As the advisory committee noted, a surcharge on methane gas is one of the smartest ways we can fund emissions reduction because it's proportional to the harm caused, and the cost, even a small price signal, helps discourage the activity. Using the revenue to reduce emissions and the harm they cause is likewise aligned. The proposed exemptions aim to limit the burden on struggling households, and we'll need to spend more time figuring out exactly how best to do that. But I'm confident that through the many steps of this process, equity can be achieved. By voting yes on 26 and no on the amendment, you won't be voting for any actual surcharge. You'll be voting to allow us to continue the conversation about how we should fund the transition to a sustainable Brookline. So please join me. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been pointed out to me that apropos of my discussion with Mr. Selwyn, if you can call it that that the next to the last resolved clause on page 8 urges that the delegation, that the legislature include as much as possible of the clause details contained in the in the original article. The original article, however, is not appended to this motion, so I don't know where that leaves us in terms of what we're asking the legislature to do. But that was, Mr. Selwyn was correct, because the original warrant article does reference the 200% income requirement. Ms. Carol Gladstone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Carol Gladstone in Precinct 2. This is my first time speaking before town meeting, and thank you for the chance to speak. I wanted to introduce myself as I start. In my day job, I'm responsible for the state's 60 million square feet of buildings, which range from group homes to the State House. We think about how to decarbonize those buildings every single day. That experience and how I've seen the legislative and regulatory process work shape my comments. I don't work with other state agencies on the regulatory regime around any utility. This article, along with the two others we're considering, they're dealing with complex issues. I don't think it's a discredit to any. Nonetheless, because we need more funding and tools, and we'll figure out the engineering proposals now is counterproductive and potentially moving us backwards with support in town. Here are my specific concerns. First, are these actually even the right tools? The current mechanisms to fund the transition, as people have described, from fossil to electric, happen through utility charges where we get mass save investment and through government investment. We pay these collectively. One of my neighbors subscribed the surcharge, and this resolution states that we would charge this tax, imposing a to say yes to this yet. Second, is this actually the legislature just voted the omnibus climate bill? There's a pilot program and huge credit to the town process, and there's a platform for discussing funding. There's a that forward to town residents. There's a lot of confusion out there about what that it hasn't been worked out. Part of it is we don't all even understand the same facts. I could go on with the many other parts, but in the end, what I'm hearing and reading are people who think town meeting is heedless of the reality of their financial challenges, and they're not ready to sign on yet. At minimum, we should approve the amendments will be brought to the voters. I don't think anyone here disputes that climate change is a huge crisis, and our town working on this for all of us deserve tremendous thanks and credit. But that doesn't mean these proposals are yet ready to be implemented, and I would recommend a no action vote on this and the other related articles. Thank you.
Well, your maiden voyage as a town meeting speaker was quite successful. You came in at 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Perry Grossman.
Hi there. Perry Grossman, town meeting member. I don't need slides, actually, thank you. Perry Grossman, town meeting member, precinct 5. In terms of disclosures, I previously worked in energy efficiency research and on some clean tech startups. I also might end up paying a surcharge, but I have 2 kids and I want a livable planet for them. I'm going to talk about how warrant article 26 helps us reach our climate commitment. In order to meet our climate goals, we need to electrify our heating systems. We need to transition off of both oil and gas. And even though oil heated homes contribute more than gas homes to emissions, a surcharge on gas will have the greatest impact because oil is expensive and people are currently transitioning their oil homes to gas powered homes because they are economically incentivized to do so. Mass Save has been subsidizing the transition from oil to gas for years. However, to get off of gas, we need to electrify everything. Warrant Article 26 asks the legislature to tip the scale in favor of using electricity to heat our homes instead of gas. Warrant Article 26 will price gas in a way that better reflects its true societal costs. Warrant Article 26 will our residents better manage that electric transition. Even from efficient gas systems results in an immediate on today's grid without 100% renewable electricity. Your home's emissions by 50 to 70%. But more importantly, a transition off of gas for Brookline Green electricity subscribers, for them, it will reduce their home emissions close to zero. So Warrant Article 26 asks for a program that would raise money to help us make that switch. What if we could pay to have an expert on hand to guide us through the ins and outs of electrifying buildings? Imagine a large multifamily building that wants to transition off gas but doesn't have the funding for the analysis. What if we could help pay for that? Or what about the homeowner who can transition off of gas in a financially feasible way today simply by using existing state and federal incentives, but who doesn't know how to do that or who doesn't know how to navigate that process? Wouldn't it be great if we had consultants we could pay for that work? Imagine how much closer things transitioning off gas. This is what really matters. Next, it is not going to just happen if guide every Brookliner through this. We need local action to spur state action, and towns are limited in what they can do. So we need the ZEB articles and state approval in order to move forward. Please support Warrant Article 26. It will help us reach our climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was made. The name is Hebert. Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. I'm John Hebert, TMM Precinct 7.
I'm sorry, I call Mr. Gerber. Yep.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Mr. Hebert, anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark Gerber, Precinct 13, speaking in opposition to Article 26. Perhaps well-intentioned, this article inflicts an additional financial burden on the Brookline taxpayers, yet provides no plan and no accountability for the usage of the money it plans to raise. We're currently asking the taxpayers to shoulder so many additional override tax burdens at once. $212 million for the Pierce School, $65 million for the fire stations, unknown millions more for potential operating overrides, on top of an already high tax rate. Now we plan to ask the residents to pay into a fund with no specific end use stated. How can we reasonably ask the taxpayers to pony up when there is no written plan what they will do with the money generated by the proposed surcharge? And it is a substantial surcharge at 25% of the cost of natural gas usage. When added to the surcharge proposed on real estate tax and the vehicle excise tax, these surcharges will impose tax burdens of thousands of extra dollars annually on individual homeowners. I see the ZEB has tried to soften the blow with an exemption language. However, that raises a whole new set of questions. What is the enforcement mechanism to be used? Will the ZEB be accessing our tax returns? Will the DOR be employed to verify incomes? Who will be the enforcers? If the ZEB intends to impose such an enormous cost, then it owes us a plan to show exactly what we will be doing. How much will the proposal cost? How will this money exactly be used to get us to this town's stated goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2040? As town meeting members have witnessed online and in their email boxes over the past several days, the ZIAB and its allies are engaged in a deceptive high-pressure sales campaign to get you to make a decision without the necessary relevant information. In fact, without any data whatsoever. They're making outrageous claims, unrealistic promises, creating false sense of urgency, and pressuring you to believe that you owe something to the ZEAB. In fact, the opposite is true. The ZIAB owes us specifics. We don't owe it a slush fund. I urge you to vote no on warrant Article 26.
Thank you, Mr. David Gladstone. I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr. Gray, before Mr. Gladstone, you'll be next.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Tonight, you will be in a rare position to make a real difference on climate by voting of 26. There's been a lot of noise on this article, but that noise has not come from the people who have spent the most time with this article. In fact, much of it over the recent days has come from people who perhaps haven't even read the article itself, and indeed who, once brought up to speed, have come around. The bodies that most understand what is in front of you are ZIAB, the Advisory Committee, the Green Caucus, and Climate Action Brookline, and those bodies are overwhelmingly in favor of it, even advisory. Those bodies know that what you will not be voting for tonight is any kind of actual tax increase. Rather, you will be voting to allow us to continue the conversation about how we should fund the transition to a sustainable Brookline. If you vote no, you will be voting to continue to limit the tools to those we already have. Those existing tools include cutting services or raising property taxes on potentially enable us to consider at a future date alternative in the right income residents. These new forms of revenue don't have to be the tax at the very beginning of the conversation. Why haven't we done better at solving this problem of climate? Where is climate action stuck? It's stuck in bodies like this one, right here, right now. If we vote against even continuing a conversation about what might be the right types of taxes to support the programs we need, programs that would help you electrify your home, programs that would help you take advantage of massive federal and state incentives that you likely don't even know exist, that we are otherwise leaving on the table. We can't achieve our goals without programs to help us do this. Please vote yes on this article, as you did on our first 3 articles, so that we can continue this important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, David Gladstone.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Town meeting members and guests, my name is David Gladstone, a longtime resident of Precinct 16 and a member of many committees, including Small Business Development, and a former member of the Select Board for Climate Action, which got repurposed into a much smaller ZIAB committee. I am also one of the founders of Climate is Everyone's Business, which served to do outreach of sustainable practices to small business. Comment on Article 26. First and foremost, the Chamber and myself as a resident are firm believers in mitigation and resiliency. One can't put forward a good plan without leveraging both paths. I would also like to echo many exchanges on the town meeting server about the Chamber not knowing about articles we never heard from the petitioners. We did hear from Ann Myers about one article in particular about the fuel hookups, which subsequently went away. And we thought there was business issues with regards to the other 3, but we were sadly mistaken. Upon finding out about the punitive nature, we had a government affairs review and wrote our letter to the town meeting, which town meeting members got. Upon further reflection, here are some additional thoughts and quotes from a fellow select board member, Michael Berger, who sent out an email echoing the comments I'm quoting. Michael commented that mitigation and resiliency must operate together as a combined effort. Article 26 only talks to mitigation. Michael also believes, like the chamber and many other businesses as well as residents, that we encourage ZEAB to look deeper and propose both mitigate communication with the state and federal legislatures to create more incentives as a penalty box. Lastly, I would like to call everyone's attention to a New York Times article which was published yesterday titled, "With Federal Aid from Inflation Reduction Act, Utilities Shift to Embrace and Not Fight Climate Goals." Do you know why? Incentives, which are the carrot versus Article 26's penalty box. By creating monetary incentives, utilities are acting in concert with what we are all trying to do as we navigate climate change and global warming. I encourage the petitioners to read up on this very insightful article that talks about leveraging carrots and not sticks. Is basically incenting utilities to voluntarily move away from fossil fuels to a more cleaner and sustainable source of energy like wind and solar. No sticks or penalty boxes necessary, only fat carrots as incentives. I encourage town meeting to find a more that focuses not only on mitigation, but also on resiliency. Let's not start with the penalty box. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, I thought you were speaking on the amendment, but you want 4 minutes, and that implies something much broader than just the amendment. So let me know what you're.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am going to speak specifically to the amendment. Thank you. My name is Paul Warren, Precinct 1. As we started the process of understanding Article 26 and the amendment that was put forward in the ZEAB, I reached out to members of our community to get their feedback. I spoke with several homeowners and renters, small business operators, real estate agents, condominium trustees, and a local executive, and the last speaker, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I was surprised that none of them had heard of the ZEAB surcharge articles. Secretary of State Galvin says this about town meeting: the pure result of democratic governing is practiced in the town meeting. It has proven to be a valuable means for many Massachusetts taxpayers to voice their opinions and directly affect change in their communities. Galvin missed one important point, though. Their opinions, the public needs to know what's going on and be invited actively to participate. Somehow, 26 and the other ZEAB articles forward, opportunities to engage with the public were bypassed. I was really surprised to learn that the Select Board did not hold a public hearing on Article 26 and the other ZEAB debated this evening, despite the fact that these articles could impact thousands of Brookline residents and business owners. Likewise, the Advisory Board chose not to take up these articles, even though the policy framework may substantially increase the operating costs for Brookline businesses and may inflate prices for local goods and services to us. Perhaps most significantly, submitting them to the warrant, where it might have heard important feedback from Brookline residents. 26 has shared many messages of concern with this body. Two messages came from former members of the Select Board's Climate Action Committee. A substantially majority of those messages were critical of the proposed articles. It seems clear that much of the publicity, the public is deeply concerned about the policies underlying Article 26 and the others. They're questioning the effectiveness and fairness of increasing the cost of natural gas, real estate, and auto excise taxes. The public is concerned about their ability to fully electrify should the policies become law. And importantly, they are concerned about the impact that the proposed surcharges in Article 26 and others will have on their household budgets and businesses' operations at a time of increasing inflation. And based on the many messages, the public appears to be quite upset. And to call it frankly, I think they're mad as hell that they were neither effectively informed nor meaningfully engaged on these matters. And I think that their trust in ZIAB, town meeting, and the select board has been impaired. I am unable to support ZIAB's proposed policy framework for Article 26 and the others because I believe them to be unfair, punitive, and ultimately ineffective in helping us achieve our goals. I think that we failed to engage the public in a collaborative way and also lost their support. We should say no, add some diversity and community engagement specialists to ZIAB and start over. However, I will say that the amendment to Article 26, which adds a requirement that any natural gas increase must be approved by the voters, is an opportunity for this body, for this town meeting, to send a message that it values the voters more than this process has indicated. But I'm still a hard no on the main motion for Article 26. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. I should have been able to infer that you were opposed to this article, so I'm going to balance the books by calling on Ms. Scanlon. There's a Mr. Sandman. You have a point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Sandman, Select Board. I think it's actually a point of personal privilege. Is that correct? When the Select Board has been criticized for not holding a hearing?
It's a question of privilege, Mr. Sandman.
Okay, question of privilege then, all right. So I will say that the Select Board heard from citizens, to be sure, and I want to repeat my own experience, which was, I think I received 2 emails directly and answered them both.
Mr. Sandman,
got responses back that were thank yous.
Okay. All right, Ms. Scanlon, and then we'll take some questions. I'm not going to take that. Ms. Scanlon, you better unmute yourself so we can hear you. You can talk. Well, all right, we'll hear from Ms. Cunningham instead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lisa Cunningham, and I am a resident of Precinct 15. Full disclosure, I am an architect and I am a co-founder of Zero Carbon MA, and I have been working on passing local and statewide electrification legislation for the past 3.5 years. That's my introduction, or that's my disclosure. So you can begin my time now. So tonight you will make a real difference. You will be able to make a real difference by voting affirmatively for a step in the right direction for climate action in our community and for our state. For a reminder, Article 26 is a resolution that passed favorably out of the advisory committee and was supported with unanimous or near unanimous votes by every single climate committee in town in a very open public process. What you will not be voting for is any actual tax increase. This resolution asks the state legislature to pass enabling legislation that would allow town meeting to opt into a surcharge, but only if it chooses to, and then only at levels and exemptions that it chooses. This has gotten all the attention. because it turns out that people don't like to pay for things that they don't think they're responsible for. Or it turns out that we feel responsible for our schools, our fire departments, our police, our libraries, our roads, but not our climate. But another important part of this resolution is that it also asks the state legislature to enable gas utilities to finance pieces of equipment like heat pumps and solar panels onto their customer bills, a program that has been successfully adopted by our neighbors in Vermont. This allows both the utilities and their customers, the customers they serve, the opportunity to transition off of fossil fuels. In short, if and when this article comes back to town meeting, we will be able to pick and choose what makes the most sense at the time when we actually have this choice available to us, not when we have to look into a crystal ball and figure out what we will need in the future. These articles will also enable us to place more of the burden of this transition on those who can most afford it and less on those who can least afford it. Is this fair? I think so, but town meeting will ultimately decide. And they will also ultimately decide if that surcharge is the price of a visit to Starbucks per month, which would yield the town about $750,000 annually, or if it is less, or if it is more. Do we trust our future selves? I do, and I hope you do too. I have been seeing comments to the effect of let's not rush into anything, and let's consider if we have the right approach. To this, I asked town meeting, is that what we say when our house is on fire? We are indeed rushing into something, and that something is catastrophic climate change. Our house is on fire, and we've considered these articles extensively, and we've had the same public process as every other warrant article. And we also, I will mention, asked a number of boards if they wanted to hear our warrant articles, and they said no. We've also heard that this might not be the best solution. The answer is, it isn't. There isn't one best solution to what we need to do now. And we don't have a crystal ball, except that we know that right now we are rushing into the fire and not out of it. That is why we are asking you to let us continue to have this discussion, to bring this back to town meeting and impose specific exemptions that make sense, not now, but when these tools are actually available to us. In the words of the UN Chief on Climate Change, Antonio Guterres, at COP 2027, our global climate fight will be won or lost in this crucial decade, on our watch. Let's continue this discussion, continue our fight, and move forward with favorable action on warrant article 26 and all the warrant articles tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. I'm sorry. We tried to contact you and failed, and now it's time for questions. And I have 20 people signed up to ask questions. So I'm going to ask every one of you who is called on to limit your questions to one. That is, I will allow one question, not 4 or 7. And I will attempt to get somebody to answer the question. I apologize about one thing that I forgot to mention. It came as a surprise and something of a shock to me to learn this afternoon that I was moderating this evening, and as a consequence, I'm not as familiar with these articles as I would have been had I known from the beginning that I was going to have to moderate them. And so it will be difficult for me to field your questions and have them adequately answered, but I'll give it a shot. So, Mr. Birnbaum, one question, please. And these are questions, not comments, not speeches.
Well, and thank you, moderator. Lee Birnbaum, town meeting member from Precinct 9, and my apologies for the immediate shakeup of. In order to conserve time, I was planning on doing some rapid fire yes/no questions to the petitioner. This should take less than a minute. Would that be okay?
If you can ask your questions in less than a minute and get an answer in less than a minute, that's fine.
Okay, can you make sure to unmute someone from the petitioners who can answer these, just all yes or no?
I'm sorry?
This is a series of yes/no questions, so I want to make sure that one of the petitioners is unmuted and able to answer yes or no to each of these.
All right. Mr. Gray.
Ready.
Go ahead, Mr. Birnbaum.
Thank you. Does passing any of these warrant articles change anything in Brookline today?
No.
If the state does not act on the home rule petition or the Brookline obligated to pass new if they do act on it, are we obligated to pass new regulations, bylaws, or et cetera that implement these concepts?
No.
Does anything about these petitions dictate exactly how we would do these things or the exact amount of fees that would be associated?
There are parameters, but the amount of the fees are not specified.
Constrain future town meetings by setting a maximum on these fees that a future town meeting could authorize?
Yes.
I've heard a lot about carrots and sticks. Does Brookline need to provide any carrots for electrical conversion?
No.
Does it having opted for 100% green electricity create funding to move off of fossil fuels?
Not currently, no.
Would the fees associated with these articles for the carrots if enacted?
Correct.
Are the changes associated with these warrant articles in the event that we intend that in the event that we enact them designed to be punitive or otherwise punishing?
That may be a matter of opinion, but they're not designed to punish anyone.
Do modern, more efficient gas
That's it.
systems or
That's
higher
it, Mr.
mileage cars?
Birnbaum. That's it. Sorry. Mr. Davis, one question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jonathan Davis, Precinct 17. Article 26 in the suite of articles seeks to create a quasi-independent branch of Brookline government with its own source of tax revenue. It narrows the town meeting's control over expenditures. Question.
Okay.
Was CTOS consulted on these articles? And if not, why not?
Mr. Benko? Who did not speak
Yep,
for
I'm
CTOS.
unmuting. CTOS was not consulted, and I do not know why not. But it was not something that was brought to our attention. We're looking at other articles, warrant Article 31, for example.
You've answered the question, Mr. Benko. Mr. Hebert, one question, not four.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator, John Hebert, TMM, Precinct 7. Just a preface, according to Article 26, these real property interests that are described will be acquired with emissions reduction fund monies. One source will be, quote, proceeds from the disposition of real property interests purchased by the emissions reduction fund. I had 5 questions. I will ask the one that I hadn't anticipated after hearing the ZIAB conflict of interest, and it is, will ZIAB benefit financially in any way?
Well, who's ZIAB? It's a committee. Ms. Linos?
Precinct 6. I'm asking a question because on the listserv around these maximum numbers, and I'm someone who cares deeply around this not having. Can you once again reiterate how these are proportional? Obviously, we'll vote in favor because the climate emergency is there, but I want
Mr. Gray?
Yes.
I think-
As Lee Selwyn mentioned, the resolution points to the language of an updated home rule petition. And in that home rule petition that is pointed to by the resolution, it is a requirement of what we are asking the legislature for. Mind you, we don't control what they do, but what we are asking them for is that it would require us to exempt any household that had under 200% of the area median income, which equates to $200,000 to $300,000. So people making less than that, depending on the family size, it's a range from 200 to 300,000, would be required to be exempted in the legislation that we are asking the legislature to adopt.
Thank you. Ms. Jonas?
Hi, I have two questions
No,
going.
You only get one.
Oh, I only get one. Okay. The more important one, which I'm trying to get straight, and I think I wrote to Joe Callahan, but it was at the very last minute. I'm trying to understand who makes the final decisions. Is it the select board? Is it town meeting? I'm referring to 26, and I'm assuming that also applies to 29. I know 28 is all the voters. In Wendy Stahl's presentation, she said that one of her lines was, the legislature will give us or I don't know how specific the legislature will be, and that town meeting could then vote to approve or not approve whatever it is that the legislature comes up with. But if the legislature comes up with for us, which I thought that's what we were thinking, who is the final arbiter of that? We've heard select board, we've heard town meeting. What is it?
Mr. Callahan. Yeah, Mr. Simpson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Jonathan Simpson, Associate Town Council. For Article 26, if the amendment is passed, it'll be town meeting and the town at large, the electorate. If the amendment is not passed, it will be town meeting. It instructs the resolution contemplates that will be authorized to enact legislation. That's something that town meeting does.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Jocelyn?
Thank you. My question is to either Mr. Benka or anyone who can answer the question. Mr. Benka referred to the Mass Save Rebate and Loan Program, which, as I understand it, expires on December 31st. Does anyone know with certainty whether that program will be extended?
Representative Vitolo, you have an answer for that?
Tommy Vitolo, representative and town meeting member at large. It will be extended. The expiration date refers to the specific program dollar amounts and the program exists and will continue to exist. The precise rebate for a particular appliance under a particular circumstance may be different in 2023 than in 2022, but the program will continue. It must continue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stokes?
Good evening, Colin Stokes, Precinct 7, town meeting member. Question for the petitioners. I'm hearing and feeling this real concern about increasing costs overall, and fear that measures like this make a higher cost burden on people, a higher financial burden. And I'm wondering if there's a way to compare that burden with the burden, if any, of continuing the use of fossil fuels.
Let's call on Ms.
I appreciate the question, Colin. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to consider. I think that we've read all the news articles about what's happening to this planet. We've seen the thousands of people who are suffering and floods and hurricanes. Even people within Brookline, there is a disparate effect on those who live in heat islands, have more trees around them. I think that the effect of doing nothing will be far greater than the effect of paying an extra $8 a month on your gas bill in the winter.
Thank you, Mr. Yassin.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Martin Yassin, Precinct 17. I just wanted to comment that
you can ask one question, Mr. Yassin.
I thought when I hit the chat, I had noted that I was making a comment.
I'm sorry, then I'm not going to call on you. Mr. Waschinsky?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Neil Waschinsky, Precinct 5. We haven't heard any arguments against the amendment, so I would pose a question to the petitioners. How do you feel about the amendment? And if you think we should vote against putting it to the voters, why?
Mr. Gray?
We trust town meeting to make the right determination on the amendment.
So you're opposed to the, I'm sorry, are you in favor of or opposed to the amendment?
We are not taking a position on the amendment.
Thank you. There's a motion to call the question. We've been at this for more than an hour. Made by Ms. Hummel and seconded by Ms. Marion Friedman Gerspan. I will allow that motion. We have the following people signed up to speak in favor of the main motion. Ms. Scanlon, Mr. Lowy, Mr. Klein, Ms. Bruce, Ms. Mautner, Ms. Benka in favor of the amendment, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Mendels, Mr. Wang, and Mr. Lowe. We have the following people signed up opposed to the main motion, Mr. Seufer and Ms. Pelkey. The following is a list of those who want to comment or ask questions, and I won't differentiate for this purpose. Michael Berger, John Hebert, Joshua Bluewolf, Simon Grossman, Shanna Giora Gorfian, sorry, you know who you are. Colin Stokes, Mark Levy, Jeffrey Benson, Harold Szymanski, David Lowe, Carolyn Thal, Paul Warren, and Marissa Vogt. Point of order. Mr. Ananian?
I'm sorry, this was a little premature. My point of order is for if the motion for the question passes.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry, the chat monitor flagged me a little prematurely. My point of order is if this motion for the question were to pass.
If the motion for the question passes, we go to vote on the amendment and then on the main motion.
Well,
So we're ready?
I may as well say my request was that if this motion for the question passes, I would appreciate if you could carefully explain the amendment before we vote on it. That was my request.
Sure.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
I don't want town meeting not knowing what it's voting on. All right, on the motion for the question. Yes.
We got 186 yes.
In favor, 49 opposed, and 8 abstentions. Which is on supplement number 2, page 1 to 2, very simply to require in the long paragraph on page 8 to require that before a municipality adds a gas utility surcharge, it must have a vote of its entire electorate. And the precise wording is in the paragraph on page 8, beginning, therefore be it resolved, the third line, city or town in Massachusetts, to enact local legislation, the amendment would insert the following words: following an affirmative vote by its electorate, comma, to enable, etc. That motion is now before us. Motion to amend.
Yeah, middle it said Article 26, but then underneath it said Article 30.
What's the count?
Out of 159 yes, 81 no, 10 abstentions.
Okay, that was a motion for, on the amendment. It had nothing to do with Article 31 that appeared on your screen. And if there's any confusion about that, please pipe up. But the motion was passed fairly substantially, 159 to 81. So I think we can go on to the main motion as amended by the Margolis amendment. The main motion is the motion on pages 7 and 8 of supplement number 1 to resolution urging the Massachusetts legislature to enact legislation to add a gas utility surcharge to the bill of et cetera, et cetera. And we're ready for a vote on the main motion as amended. Yet the vote.
133 yes, 112 no, 8 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 133 in favor, 112 opposed, and 8 abstentions. There is no motion offered under Article 27, and it's almost 10 o'clock. We've managed to slog through 2 articles this evening. They're difficult articles and controversial ones. Article 28 promises to be equally to encourage a similar amount of discussion as 26. And given the hour, we won't get through 28 until at least 11 o'clock, is my guess. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn to tomorrow. It's moved by Mr. Sandman, seconded by Harry Friedman. The motion is to adjourn town meeting until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. We're ready for a vote. Count, please. Carries. Town meeting is hereby adjourned until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening.